and the development sector. We always strive to improve our efforts, and one is always ready to provide the platform for such discussions. Today, we have with us very Honorable Miss Ingrid Shrinath, who will give a talk on the topic, an agenda for policy reform for civil society in India. Before I invite her, I invite Harshji for setting the context. Sir, आपके लिए.
Yes, madam. Thank you. Thank you.
जी
No,
सर.
it's a great opportunity, actually. I think also to link with the friends in a very informal setup. I believe it's informal conversation because I know Ingrid for many years, and she is I think there is a group of very good, I think, say, social sector individuals who came from CRY. उसमें Ingrid है, Pooja hai. So there are a lot of, I think, I see that a good amount of experience she has of dealing with variety of shapes and sizes of civil society, from CRY se leke, chahe wo, he was with Civicus, and then with HIVOS, and then with CSIP. So I think we can learn a lot from her diverse experience with civil society. And it is a great, I think, also interest shown by participants that they want to listen her. And maybe I will take use of presence of Poonamji and all other senior people here, that maybe we can start a series of such informal conversations in future also, because everyone have excellent storage of knowledge which is lying somewhere in the shelf of somewhere in the brain, and let's share it and bring it to public domain. So Ingrid ji, all yours. I think इसको हम लोग अभी बढ़ाते हैं भाषा का. I don't know which type of language we can continue, but Ingrid ji, you can manage wherever. Hindi, English, I know you can, or even Bombay wala language you also do. Please. Thank you, and thanks for giving us time. Thank you.
जी, thank you sir. अब मैं invite करती हूँ Ingrid जी को. Though all of you know her so very well, फिर भी formality के लिए let me introduce her. Ingrid Shrinath has been a passionate advocate for human rights, social justice, and civil society in India and around the world for over 25 years. Most recently, she was the founder director of the Center for Social Impact and Philanthropy at Ashoka University. She has served as CEO of Child Rights and You, Secretary General at Civicus, Executive Director at Childline India, CEO at HIVOS India, and on multiple international and Indian boards. In 2020, Ms. Ingrid received the Distinguished Alumna Award from her alma mater, the Indian Institute of Management, Kolkata. So this is a very brief introduction, and Ingrid ji, floor is yours. We are all anxious.
Thank you, Shabin. Thank you, Harsh.
Thank you.
Thank you to everyone who suggested doing this webinar. The immediate provocation, well, first of all, let me apologize that I will only speak in English. This is purely to avoid embarrassing myself. But I'm happy to take questions in other languages as well, Hindi and Marathi and Gujarati and Tamil and Bengali and so on. The immediate provocation for setting up this webinar was a book that actually got released just yesterday, which is called Rethinking India, The Great Indian Manthan. And actually, let me share my screen while I'm at it. Yes, can you see my screen? So the immediate provocation, as I said, was the release of this book, in which I was privileged really to get to write a chapter. The book is part of a 14-volume series by the Samriddha Bharat Foundation, which so far in the 11 books that have already been published, they've looked at who are we and what do we wish to be as a nation. They've looked at the situation of minorities. They've looked at the employment question. They've looked at citizenship and democratic participation. They've looked at the issue of caste. They've looked at the issue of gender, which in fact was edited by our colleague Nisha Agarwal. They've looked at tribal issues, Dalit issues, and specifically, and health in India. The specific, why am I so bad at this after all? The goal of this series is not to do some academic sort of exercise. It's really to arrive at a very actionable plan for addressing the key issues of Indian society, Indian economy, and Indian democracy. And while many of the authors are academics and technocrats, equally, almost all of them have deep experience in the field in which of which they're writing. Coming to the specific volume, which is Great Indian Manthan, this volume focuses on the institutions of the state, the institutions that foster and nurture and protect our democracy. It looks at how specifically across these institutions we have deviated from the original constitutional norms and how that deviation affects our lives today. So in a sense, to summarize, it looks at what we should have been, what we are, and what we could and should be in the future. And as I said, it focuses as much on looking at solutions as it does about describing the problems. The authors and the topics are definitely, for me, this was like all the stuff I should have learned in civics, but failed to pay attention when I was in class. All of that got redressed by this book. So issues about, the topics of the cabinet, the National Advisory Council, Parliament, how coalitions operate, the judiciary, the institution of the governor, which is currently a hot button topic, the election commission, which is always a hot button topic, federal institutions like the Interstate Council, the Finance Commission, the GST Council, the Information Commission, which again has been a sore point for the last few years, the bureaucracy. And I was pleasantly surprised that among these very official sort of institutions, they chose to also include civil society, which I think is a welcome addition. As you can see, I'm the least qualified of the authors listed here. Everybody here has been a senior bureaucrat, a senior politician, head of an election commission, the head of an information commission, and so on. So coming to my chapter, which is on, the goal really was to say, if we are going to have a healthy, vibrant society, then what needs to change? And so what it starts by doing is looking at why does civil society exist? What is its raison d'etre? What is the value that it adds to a democracy? Why is it a critical component of a democracy? And what are all the different roles it plays? Then it sort of looks at the current challenges, all of the ones listed there, regulations, which we are all too familiar with, the assault on democratic freedoms, which we are all too familiar with, the constraints on our ability to access resources of different kinds, which again is an ongoing struggle for most of us, but also looking at our role as facilitators of citizen voice in governance, also looking at what is our relationship with the state, looking a little bit at philanthropy and CSR, and then dwelling just for a moment on the impact of COVID-19 before I end with the actual recommendations. So civil society, as you guys know better than me, is actually quite hard to define. And in a sense, when Nehru spoke on the 15th of August, 1947, the second part of his speech, we all know the first part. We made a tryst with destiny, blah, blah, blah. The second part doesn't get as much attention. But in many ways, I think that second part actually defines the role of civil society better than most things I've seen. It says the future beckons to us, whither do we go and what shall be our endeavor, to bring freedom and opportunity to the common man, to the peasants and workers of India, to end poverty, ignorance, and disease, to build up a prosperous, democratic, and progressive nation, and to create social, economic, and political institutions which will ensure justice and fullness of life to every man and woman and I should add in all genders, really. So people over time have struggled to define civil society. In our policy discourse in India, most often it is referred to as the voluntary sector. Some people have said civil society is literally the social basis of democracy. Other people have compared it to a vaccine. This is the entity which immunizes us against threats to the health and vitality of our society and our democracy. Technically, most often it's defined as a space or an arena which is distinct from the state, the market, and the family, where individuals get together to achieve ends which are beyond their self-interest. Or the shortest definition in some ways is private action for public good. In terms of then the entities that occupy this space, and I think we started to use the phrase civil society in India most frequently after the India Against Corruption movement started. And quite often we misuse the term and we think of civil society as organizations rather than as an arena or a space. But within that space, there are multiple different kinds of entities that are housed, which you might call civil society organizations. Some of them are NGOs, and quite often we use the word civil society organization and NGOs synonymously, but we're really only a subset of civil society. There are also grassroots movements, there are also community groups, there are also philanthropic organizations, faith-based organizations, and I think one of the lasting difficulties of our time is the lack of engagement between the secular organizations and the faith-based organizations. The trade unions, of course, there's non-profit media, there are think tanks, research organizations, advocacy organizations, and a large number of cultural and sports organizations, which again, we tend not to think about when we think about civil society. But the BCCI, for example, is arguably the largest and wealthiest of all our civil society organizations. The other thing I think we sometimes keep a very narrow focus on is the range of roles that we are meant to play in a functioning democracy. We are, of course, meant to provide services that fill the gaps, to reach the unreached, to cover the last mile, to do what Gandhi talked about, the talisman of who is the last person in the queue. But we're also meant to play the role of a watchdog. We're also meant to play the role of an advocate, which raises issues. We're also meant to play the role of an expert, because in every domain that you can think of, the average civil society person working in that domain is far more of an expert than the average politician, the average bureaucrat, the average business person, the average journalist. Of course, we're meant to build capacity. We're meant to be the incubator of innovation. This is where, and across time in India, most of the most successful policies and schemes that run originated as a civil society innovation. We're meant, of course, to be representative, particularly for those people who go unrepresented or underrepresented in decision-making. We're meant to encourage the culture of civic action, of helping people engage as citizens rather than just as voters or as shareholders or as consumers or as family members. We're meant to, of course, build solidarity, not just within civil society, but across society at large, to bridge the many divides that divide us in our country, and now, of course, increasingly around the world. And finally, another one that sort of doesn't get enough attention is the idea of civil society as the upholder and defender of standards. If you think about anything from labor law to environmental protection to child rights to anything, our societal standards for what is okay and what is not okay have been developed by civil society, and we need to continue to play that role. So beyond the specific form, whether you're a society, a trust, a Section 8, a foundation, a trade union, a residents' welfare association, a Mahila Mandal, whatever, beyond those specific forms, the real value of civil society in a functioning democracy is this is where citizens find collective meaning. This is where we find collective purpose. This is where we learn to engage with people who are different from us, and where we build understanding of each other and respect for each other. So a weak civil society is inevitably going to result in a weakened social fabric. This is where we learn how to practice democracy, not just the one which says go once in 4 or 5 years and cast a vote, but democratic decision making, where we learn to agree, learn to disagree, and learn to agree to disagree, which you will agree with me is sorely lacking right now in our societies. And of course, where we have a space that's free from structures, processes, constraints that allow us to organize and act collectively on the issues that we care about. One critical thing that I think it's important for us to remind ourselves at this point, this is not new news to anyone on this webinar today, but these freedoms, these roles, the forms that these entities take, these are non-negotiable. They are guaranteed to us under our Constitution, Article 19, by the treaties that we have signed globally, whether it is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights or the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and numerous other international agreements. So this idea somehow that somebody is doing us a favor by letting us participate in decision-making or by letting us play the role of innovator is something that we really need to disabuse ourselves of. Conventionally, in the textbooks, which we've all seen at some point in time, society is defined as these 3 types of entities: civil society, state, and market. I think where we are today, however, is it's much more complex, because there are blurring boundaries between state and market, whether this is market influence on state and crony capitalism, or whether this is public sector enterprises where the state is engaged as a player in the market. The same on our side of the fence when we look at who is delivering social impact. It ranges from informal groups, movements, all the way through to for-profit social enterprises. And so these boundaries between what is profit, non-profit, formal, informal, market, state, and civil society are all blurring. And actually, it was the World Economic Forum that came up with this, that said, rather than see civil society as the third sector, civil society needs to be the central figure in this triangle, which is the glue that brings public and private activity together so as to strengthen the common good. So coming now to the challenges that are described in the book. The first one, of course, which, as I said, we are all unfortunately and deeply familiar with, is the regulatory regime. We have, as you know, these multiple statutes under which it is possible to register societies, trusts, Section 8. But if you look at the broader spectrum, trade unions, cooperative societies, for-profit and not-for-profit, service delivery organizations like hospitals and schools and universities and so on. When the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation did a study in 2011, they identified 3.1 million entities registered mostly under the Societies Act. And this number, of course, has now become the stick with which we are beaten. There are 3.1 million of you and only 20,000 submitted FCRA returns. There are 3.1 million of you. That's, 1 for every 6 villages. How come, or 6 per village? How come you aren't making impact? It's important to remember, one, that of the 3.1 million that were registered at the time, less than 700,000 were actually validated, where the MOSPI people went and physically verified the existence of these entities. If you look at the time that I looked at it, I'm sure it's increased since then. If you look at tax-exempt entities under 12AA and 80G, then there are under 500,000 tax-exempt entities. And as I said, these include people like hospitals, colleges, universities, schools, etc., who nobody would see as active players in the development arena. Niti Aayog's portal, at the time that I referred to it for the book, had 163,000 organizations registered. And as we all know, there are less than 20,000 now entities registered under FCRA. anyone can register under any statute. So unlike, say, the US, where your 501c3 is one kind of entity, your 501c4 is a different kind of entity, and your 501a, B, D, etc. are different entities. Here, it's a complete mishmash. And similarly, the administration of these regulations is a complete mishmash. So definitions are arbitrary and change from department to department. So what is called charitable purpose under FCRA is different from what is called charitable purpose under Income Tax Act. The implementation of these regulations, as you know, is arbitrary. Who knows why the Federation of Indian Animal Protection Organizations has lost its FCRA? It's completely random. And of course, it's opaque. There is no redress. There is no way of finding out. When I was at HEVOS, for example, we discovered by accident when we tried to open a bank account that we were on the so-called PRC list. But nobody was willing to tell us why we were on this list or how we could get off this list. So clearly, the first recommendation is that we need a much better typology of different kinds of organizations, and we need to be able to rationalize the regulatory framework. In most countries that have a well-functioning civil society regime, there is an independent regulator. These are variously called the Charities Commissioner, or there's a ministry in the government that regulates civil society. And typically the roles that are played by such a regulator are, one, they define who's eligible to call themselves a civil society organization. They mandate what kind of reporting is required. They are authorized to register people and to deregister them. They provide services, capacity building, coordination, guidance to civil society organizations who are keen to register, grow, learn more. They're the ones who commission the research that tells you what's the size of the sector, what's changing about the sector, what are the emerging trends, and so on. They become the single window that gives you access to all the different ministries that you need access to. I remember when we were working on child labor, for example, child labor as an issue is affected by 7 different ministries. It's not just the Ministry of Women and Child Development, and not just even the Ministry of Labor that can legislate on child labor. And so you need, like you have a Ministry of Corporate Affairs, which is the single window for business, you need a similar authority where the ministerial or charities commissioner, or whatever you want to call it, that becomes the custodian of all that pertains to civil society. And they have a mission typically to facilitate the participation of civil society in different forums. So quite often, if you look at many countries I can think of, Harsh knows these from his engagement with Civicus, for example. There are countries that will actually sponsor civil society organizations to attend a Civicus World Assembly, or to attend a World Bank meeting, or to attend a UN General Assembly, and so on. And of course, the broader mandate of simply promoting civic engagement as a culture is something that... So one recommendation, and I'll come back to the recommendations at the end, is that we need a similar independent regulator that whose autonomy is guaranteed and who reports directly to Parliament. Other sectors have these kinds of regulators, right? You have a press council. So the government cannot be the arbiter of disputes that relate to media freedom, for example, because since the media needs to be free, it cannot be regulated by government. It needs an independent regulator. The microfinance industry, for example, has evolved its own forms of self-regulation, which report to the RBI. The Advertising Standards Council of India is the regulator for all matters pertaining to advertising. And so, for example, even if you look at some of the recent changes on social media advertising, those are done by, and the Advertising Standards Council actually has quasi-judicial power to legislate on these issues. So exactly in that form, you need an independent, autonomous regulatory body that can oversee civil society. I will also come to some of the objections to these when we talk about them. So moving from regulation to the assault on democracy itself, right? Everyone here knows how our ratings and rankings on the various global indices, whether it's of human rights or freedom of expression, religious freedom, civil society space, media freedom, academic freedom, democracy itself, have been precipitously declining for the last several years. We are experiencing censorship in all but official name. Constraints on access to all kinds of resources for civil society are limited, and the constraints grow greater every day. And this is not just financial resources. Try to get a visa for a researcher to come to India and do research, or try to get a visa for people to attend a civil society conference in India. And you'll see that it's not just financial resources that we are being cut off from. Add to that the politicization of state agencies and the weaponization of law enforcement to target activists, human rights defenders, and civil society groups, whether this is in the form of the Enforcement Directorate or the CBI or any of these institutions, as well as the compromised independence of the judiciary through all kinds of means that you're all too familiar with. People have labeled India as no longer a functioning democracy. Some people have called it an electoral autocracy, which is we have elections, but we are governed in an autocratic rather than a democratic fashion. A phrase that came up in this book, in the introductory essay, I think it is. No, it's not. It's from a news article I read recently, was sultanism, which is, this is not authoritarianism as we know it. This is sultanism, in the sense that all decision-making authority is centralized in one individual and the office that surrounds that individual. And that decisions that affect 1.4 billion people are taken on the whims of this sultan. The other word that I found that is actually in the introductory chapter to this book that I have been completely obsessed with since I came across it is this German phrase called Gleichschaltung. Literally translated, it means consolidation. But it was a phenomenon in Nazi Germany where every German institution had to fall in line, had to be part of the Nazi project, whether this was a social institution, political, cultural, sports, arts, you name it, media, etc. All of them had to be controlled according to Nazi ideology and policy, and anyone who deviated from that ideology had to be eliminated. I don't think I've come across a better phrase to describe what the state of our current democracy is. So in terms of how does this need to be addressed, we obviously need to relook at and revise every policy that has the effect of hampering civil society in playing its role as a defender of democracy. This includes whether it's onerous registration processes, whether it's intrusive monitoring, whether it's constraints on communication and protest, and whether it is even technical definitions of things like activity of a political nature, interests of national security, and so on, that are used to arbitrarily clamp down on with Section 144 or with internet shutdowns. The draconian laws that allow people to be put into prison and literally throw away the key without charging them, without bringing them to trial. We all know the cases of the BK16 or the young people associated with the anti-CAA protests. But whether it's UAPA, NSA, I don't know why I have UAPA there twice, Section 124A, which is the sedition law, all of these really need to, they don't have a space in a functioning democracy. Advanced democracies do not have such laws. It is simply impossible to jail somebody for years and years without even bringing them to trial. The new bills that are being now offered in the next session of Parliament, in many cases, while they change the nomenclature, so it's no longer called sedition, it's actually been smuggled in a vague kind of definition that is even broader and even more susceptible to abuse than the current definition. So we absolutely need to take a long, hard look at those and resist them as much as possible. And then there's the whole question of data. Not only is civil society not enumerated, so we don't get reported in the national income statistics or the national accounts of any kind. Even the data that we used to have access to, for example, the data on FCRA has since been disappeared. And when the ministry was asked why this data was no longer accessible, their response was, nobody needs it. So the ministry is going to decide what data you need and in what form you can have access to it. And this is not just data as it relates to civil society. This is data across the board. If you cannot report what is the incidence of, what is the word I'm looking for? Anemia in the country, without first being accused of malfeasance and then losing your job. If you cannot, if surveys that have been completed by national statistical organizations that are envied around the world for their competence cannot be published because the data is unsuitable. If you will not conduct a census, if you will rubbish and debunk every global study, then how, as a civil society entity, how do you even evaluate what is the effect of policy? Which policies are delivering, which are not? Who is covered, who is uncovered? Our poverty estimates currently range from 2% of India to 20% of India. On a base of 1.4 billion, that is either a few million or it's a few hundred million. How can you make decisions on inequality, on livelihoods, on skill building, on any of these things, if you can't even estimate how many people are going to bed hungry every night? So data is a whole other issue, and we need norms on data privacy, on data protection, on proportionality, on transparency, and on right to redress. Then we come to our favorite topic, which is money. So international law is very clear on this, that civil society organizations have an intrinsic right under Article 20 of the Human Rights Declaration to access resources, both domestic and foreign. Of course, this access can be limited, provided that those constraints are shown to be reasonable, proportionate to the threat. So yes, of course, as the Financial Action Task Force said some years ago, it is conceivable that civil society organizations might be used as a channel to fund terrorism or to do money laundering. But this is equally possible with a private entity. And somehow private sector is not subjected to any of the scrutiny and constraints that civil society is subjected to. I cannot think of a single case where the government has proven that a civil society organization was used as a channel to fund terrorist activities or to do money laundering or any such nefarious stuff. And yet the laws become more stringent every year. We need, as I said, a clear, coherent, contemporary definition of charitable purpose. Our definitions of charitable purpose come from colonial laws. And so they are mostly focused on charity in the traditional sense of the word. They don't include advocacy. They don't include policy influence. And despite the fact that the Supreme Court has ruled that activity of a political nature only refers to partisan political activity, police and government continue to charge and jail people for merely attending a protest. We need, for example, while the CSR law provides some, 15,000-20,000 crores of money to the sector every year, we cannot let that law become an obstacle to actually ensuring that business delivers on its commitments and its responsibilities to human rights and to environmental protection. And we need to completely redefine the norms of engagement between government bodies and civil society. So this sort of my-baap culture, where somehow they're the ones in power, they're the ones with the money, they determine the agenda, they determine who will participate, and we are supposed to just line up and take whatever crumbs are offered. That relationship needs to be completely redefined. The last challenge I'll talk about was what happened during COVID, right? Nobody in this room needs reminding of the complete breakdown that we saw in public services, which was almost entirely compensated by civil society groups. We saw the huge glaring gaps in our public health systems, education systems, labor rights, social protection, all of it. How did our state respond? most countries around the world that have a functioning civil society responded with support for that civil society. So in the UK, for example, there was a £750 million fund set up just to protect civil society from having to not lose staff during that period. In the US CARES, I think it was called, was a $1 trillion budget, which civil society had as much access to as business or small scale enterprise or anybody else in terms of tiding over the COVID crisis. Because any sane government knows that they need civil society. And so just like enterprise needs to be protected, jobs need to be protected, civil society needs to be protected at these times. In our own country, during the Gujarat earthquake or during the tsunami, at least, for example, we had the phenomenon of FCRA constraints being lifted, or we had 100% tax exemption, for example, offered to all earthquake relief work or all tsunami relief work. In this crisis, far bigger than either the earthquake or the tsunami or any other similar natural or man-made disaster, we've experienced the opposite. Not only were none of these things waived or lightened in terms of burden, we actually had our prime minister competing with us in the fundraising domain. So they could offer 100% tax exemption, CSR eligibility, no FCRA barriers at all, while civil society, on the other hand, got an increased burden of compliance. So we had the FCRA amendments in September, we had changes to the IT rules, changes to CSR rules, all even as we were struggling to survive ourselves, to protect our teams, to protect our communities and deliver what they were asking for. What I've referred to in the last point as the triple whammy. On the one side, demand for your services rose sharply. On the other side, your ability to deliver those services was reduced sharply, and with funding constraints and money being diverted both to PM CARES and to non-development activities. At best, what we got in return was some lip service, right? Some statement was made by someone in Niti Aayog, some statement was made by the Prime Minister, and that was it. We then went back not just to business as usual, but to increase targeting. Even when it came to social protection, you would imagine that having seen what the lack of social protection did to people, whether they were migrant workers or whether they were rural women or whether they were children who were not able to make it to school, you would imagine that you would use this opportunity to strengthen social protection. In our case, the opportunity was used to weaken and erode social protection. So pulling this all together, then, what are the few recommendations that this chapter in this book focuses on? I should point out that none of this is my own invention. All of it builds on the work of Vani, of the task force which Matthew Cherian and others worked on that advised the Vajpayee government. So it goes back to recommendations as early as 2007 and really consolidates Vijay Mahajan's contributions. So it really consolidates the recommendations that have been made by different experts at different points in time. No part of it, as I said, is my own invention. As per Vijay Mahajan's recommendation, the first thing we need, or one of the main things we need, is for civil society to be recognized under the Constitution in the way that the cooperative movement is recognized under the Constitution as a distinct entity that has a distinct role to play. We need a similar amendment to the Constitution that will recognize civil society. There needs to be clear definition of what the state's role is in engaging with the promotion of civil society, protecting the autonomy of civil society, and ensuring civil society's ability to participate in participatory governance. As I said earlier, we need to rationalize and streamline registration. We obviously need an independent regulator who is not just an enforcer of laws, but also a facilitator. We need a civil society. This authority needs to be able to administer a civil society development fund that can pay for capacity building, research, and so on. The platforms that we used to have, whether it was the Planning Commission all the way down to local village level platforms where civil society and state interacted have all been either demolished or been completely shanghaied away from civil society, and our access to them is severely, they've either been disappeared or we have no access to them. So institutionalizing those platforms where participatory governance can happen and where civil society can represent citizens' voices in democratic decision making is a critical recommendation. The same with all the different Minorities Commission, the Scheduled Caste Commission, the Commission for Women, the National Child Rights Protection Commission, etc. All of these have been allowed to fall into decay or have been entirely co-opted by one political ideology. And so to redesign those to ensure their ongoing autonomy is another reform that is necessary. Promoting civic culture and curriculum. Civil society as an entity needs to be in our civics textbooks. The role that civil society has played in our country from independence to now needs to be part of our history books. The book that was published by recently called A Million Missions, I think is a good first step in that direction. But we need much more coherent, authoritative, reliable curricula to be developed on the role of civil society, not just for schools and colleges, but even more critically in Dehradun. I mean, IAS officers have, I cannot describe, anyone who has interacted with bureaucrats in ministries will know this. They haven't the foggiest about what an NGO is, what we do, what our legal protections are, or what role they are expected to play with us. Of course, repeal the draconian laws and policies that we talked about, ensure corporate responsibility, as I mentioned, incentivize and promote a culture of giving. I mean, we are seeing that the potential exists across India, from rural to urban, from the poorest to the wealthiest, to give and to give much more, not just in money, but in time, in skills, in advocacy, and so on. And there needs to be a enabling environment created to incentivize the doing of good. And finally, like we've had sweeping reform in the corporate sector in the name of ease of doing business, we need a similar complete review of all policies so that we can have ease of doing social and democratic good. So just before I go to Q&A, the big question, of course, when you write a chapter like this is people read it and say, what's the point, Ingrid? Nothing is going to change. This government is completely deaf to these recommendations that you're making. Even if they were to take up these recommendations, we would be fearful of how they would interpret them and how they would use them to actually further constrain civil society. So the reason really I think that it's important for us to create this material, to discuss it and to disseminate it is, it's important first, before we advocate for a single policy reform out there, for us to have a shared understanding of our role, our purpose, where we stand in our constitution, and what we need as an agenda. So a shared understanding of who we are and why we exist. We need a shared destination. What is it that we ideally want to see, even if it's not possible in the next 6 months or 12 months or 12 years or whatever? What is our goal as an entity? How do we shape the narrative? Are we in a position in our family WhatsApp groups or in our communities or in our organization to respond to the allegations and accusations that are constantly being made about civil society? Can we present the counter view? Can we use this agenda setting as a means of building solidarity? So not just within NGOs, but between secular NGOs and faith-based organizations, between those kinds of organizations and movements, between those different kinds of organizations and trade unions and so on. In the short term, we have the opportunity to at least advocate for these measures to be included in political party manifestos for the upcoming elections. So there are parts of these that are relevant at the state level, parts of these that are relevant at the central level, and we need to be able to do the kind of advocacy that we used to do quite routinely with political party. I mean, it was successfully done, for example, in Karnataka, where you had this really strong civil society input into the manifestos of the alliances. But most of all, I really believe that more than any government, more than any ideology, more than any funders or non-funders, more than any law enforcement agencies, our biggest enemy at this moment in time is cynicism. Our belief that change cannot happen, our belief that change will not happen, our belief that there's no point in fighting these forces is the biggest barrier to us actually accomplishing anything. And if this sort of discussion, in a sense, can bring people together to say, can we revisit our purpose? Can we find hope and optimism in the current milieu? Is, I think, the purpose we hoped that writing this chapter and this book and this series of books would serve. So having said that, let me stop sharing and ask for questions, comments, or anything else that you wish to offer.
Yeah, thank you, Ingrid. What I suggest is that people can directly ask you questions and whatever opinion they have. And let's continue. Yes.
Maybe you can type your question into the chat or just raise your hand, and then we can give you the floor.
I don't have a question, Ingrid, as yet, because I think there's just so much gold in what you've just presented that I feel like it needs time. I need time to let it sit and think about it a little bit, but thank you for pulling it all together. And I think there's a real call to action in there for us as civil society actors to think about what we need to be doing and how we need to be coming together. So thank you for this. And yeah.
Thank you, Priyanka. Hari Shankar ji, you have your hand up. If you can unmute.
Yeah. मेरा एक सुझाव है, आप जो बहुत अच्छा लगा प्रेजेंटेशन. वी नो द एनवायरनमेंट विद इन अस, कैसे एनवायरनमेंट है स्टेट या सेंट्रल में भी वो एनवायरनमेंट है, तो कहीं से शुरू कैसे किया जाए, हमारे तरफ से वो ध्यान आकर्षण करने के लिए क्या कैसे इन्फ्लुएंस कर सकते हैं, वो थोड़ा हाईलाइट करेंगे तो अच्छा रहेगा.
I mean, I don't know whether I have the expertise to do this, but I think one of the things we absolutely need to do is convening at the state level and at the national level to simply start up a conversation. These are, as I said, recommendations that came from 2007 onwards, looking at what different people have said. But what do we need now? What do you currently need us to focus on right now? Where can we find the intersections of interest in different groups? Where can we just give each other a sense of courage and solidarity? So it seems to me that as soon as possible, we really need more convenings to happen at each level to identify what are those areas of
meeting.
Sorry, was that a question?
No, I think that was leakage.
All right.
Please continue.
And what I have found, this is what at CSIP we found, which is if you have a wish list, and let's call it what it is right now. Right now, it's a wish list. It's not an agenda yet. If you have a wish list, which you're prepared with, then when the opportunity arises, you can seize it. So if you think about, for example, the horrible Nirbhaya case, right? Why did we get legal reform after Nirbhaya? Of course, it was because the country at large was horrified. But the reason you could actually translate that outrage into legislation was because groups of women's organizations were prepared to seize the opportunity. They knew what reform they needed in the law, and they were able to seize that. So we need to similarly think of this as a wish list as the opportunity arises. And that opportunity could come from a tunnel collapse in Uttarakhand, or it could come from a God knows what the heck is happening in Joshimath, or it could happen from a conflict situation in one of our states. There's if we have a predefined agenda in our heads, we can then respond to whatever opportunities come up in our context. And we need a structure, Harsh, where we can reach out for help. I mean, if Vani can be that hub which says Hari Shankar is sitting in, I don't know where Hari Shankar is sitting in, and he has an opportunity, is there a mechanism by which he can do a shout out? In Odisha? Yeah. Is there a way for him to reach out and do a shout out that says who else is facing this? Can we convene a conversation to determine our response? We need that easy mechanism that goes beyond a WhatsApp group, because WhatsApp groups tend to sort of focus on the immediate, not on the long term.
Hello.
Yeah, yes, please, Madhu.
Yes. Thanks a lot, Ingrid. That was excellent presentation in terms of its width, breadth, and everything. I mean, you covered all contours of the CSO, this thing. And I totally agree with this thing. And I was also somewhat or introduced to the new terminologies that you've shared, and they were quite interesting. Yes, there is a need for consolidation of CSO culture as of now. And the struggle that it has brought through, I mean, through the Corporate CSR Act amendment, government gave a little bit of rope and took back from the other end, because philanthropic foundations came up to compete with us. And so CSOs were again left for the crumbs and all. But in the recommendations, I would only have a little bit of, something to share, because yes, there are NGOs which are not so good. They in Kashmir, I've been while at UNODC, I've worked with the MHA officials for certain time, and there were NGOs who were becoming the tool for money laundering or even spreading communalism and conversions that certain NGOs in Naxal areas are bound. I mean, we should not tread that line. Let government take it as per norms, but a bit of self-regulation should be added to the recommendations, so that there is a credibility to our own movement, I think. Because even for media, they've gone into self-regulation. They've tried to not fully achieve it, but that's my suggestion. Absolutely. And it was excellent presentation again. Absolutely.
And if you actually look at the FATF, Financial Action Task Force recommendations, they were set up for the single-minded purpose of preventing the misuse of financial flows for these purposes, right? And what they have made very clear is that you do need to protect against these things happening, but the regulations need to be proportionate, reasonable, and targeted. You can't be getting 3.5 million NGOs to all conform to the highest level of most stringent regulation, because there are 3.5 NGOs who are misusing them. So that's one of the recommendations in FATF. The other recommendation in FATF is that if you're whatever regulations you're going to impose, you need to do capacity building for NGOs so that they are able to understand and comply with those regulations. Also that they can identify, like you have these explainers on how to detect an internet scam, right?
Yeah.
They need to do capacity building for NGOs to say, this is how you will know that your organization is being targeted for misuse under these.
Yeah.
So the government has been completely disproportionate in its use of those regulations. Secondly, it has failed to deliver on the capacity building part of the recommendations. It's only done the regulations. It hasn't done its part.
Agree.
They require us to do our part, but they haven't done their part. But thank you. I will actually put that in as a separate point. Who has their hand up? I don't know what.
Mr. PPS.
Yeah.
Good morning. Let me thank you for making it very clear, and Harsh also made this day to get into that. Just only 1 minute, I would like to make it up. See, there are good NGOs, there are smart NGOs, there are bad NGOs. There may be different categories in each sector. It is not only in civil society. So let us understand that. But the problem is that out of, as you rightly said, 3.5 lakhs of institutions in the country, nowadays the spirit of the organizations is coming down. And the voice of the organizations are also coming down. It is not only because of the financial crisis, it is the ability of the people who are fighting for that. It is, they feel that we should not get into that. So that kind of attitude is coming down. I'm a professional who studied social work in 1982. Still, I'm in the sector 39 years. I feel very sad when I'm seeing it. A group of people who started from the Gandhian movement, it has come to a professional approach. But now it is going decreasing the spirit, and we are saying it. Women come together, Adivasis come together, the daily workers come together. We will fight for your civil right, all that. But we NGOs, we are not coming together, as you rightly mentioned. Whether it is an FCRA, whether it is an finance ministry, whether it is an health ministry, we are not coming together. We have a common code of conduct like an SRO. SRO can be a code of conduct among ourselves. But at the same time, the issue of Tamil Nadu could be a different from Andhra Pradesh. The issue of Andhra Pradesh will be different from Kashmir, which Ingrid Madam will agree on that. And legally, when we speak about it, Vani should have a resource tank. I can say think tank, like you people who are eminent lawyers. Even though I am a lawyer, I am sitting in Tamil Nadu. I am not in Delhi. You are all stalwarts, you are doing it. So some sort of issues when people are having it, to provide a guidance, to do it for the people's issues as well as for the organization issues. I will put a last word. You have to excuse me saying this word. Now the government is using this civil service organization as a pickle and curd race. I'm using it again. Now the government, of late, the government is using the civil society organization pickle and curd rice whenever they want. Actually, earlier, the government has used much more the civil service organizations for women's issues, Adivasi issues, for a deprived community, for the differentially abled people, or for agriculture, tank modernization, or food production, watershed. So different as in human rights, as you mentioned it. But nowadays, it is not like so. So there is some government organized NGOs are there, which I am calling it gongos. So those people are letterpad people. They don't have a professional approach. They don't have a professional ethics and integrity, which they spoil the whole sector of it, where the Vani has to need to weed out. Vani has to come out with a code of conduct for the members among us, so that we will be in a spirit. I'm also a member of Sadhan, where Mini Bedi is also there. So, and from Sadhan, there is a spin-off of MFIN has come. So this is a natural evolution will take place in any kind of development. So here we have to strengthen Vani with the people like you, with a resource tank. People should provide. Many people, they lost their FCRA. Many people, they're not able to get access of getting it. The one more point which I would like to add, many of the foreign donors are not comfortable where I am dealing with them to give money for any of the development work in India. This is what they in principle, they refuse it. Earlier, they have done it. They have some apprehension on our country. This attitude need to be changed by way of a collective mechanism. What you said, collective collaborative way with like-minded people, we should do it. Thanks a lot.
I mean, I know Vani has been trying to popularize a code of conduct for at least 10 years now.
And there is for
exists.
members also
It already
self-certification.
exists. We need to do a better job of disseminating it. But yeah, all of the suggestions are good. Go ahead, Kiran.
Yeah, thank you, Ingrid. It was simply wonderful. And, I had something very urgent, so I joined at the fag end. So I'm feeling very bad. So one is, I would love to get this presentation. And secondly, I don't know, through your different slides, did you touch upon the boards? The way, the boards are being, eroded. Nobody is interested in becoming a board member on a non-profit. Because the kind of things expected, and not only I as a board member, but my family, my husband, my child, everybody's all the details they need, even though everything is linked, and they can do the recce if they really want to, they on their own. But we are losing our board members. The voluntary sector really depended a lot on such volunteers who are highly skilled and highly experienced and highly motivated. Now their motivation is getting eroded, and that's my major worry. All the other things that you touched, I thought they were very well done. I would also say that Vani needs to take a little larger role. I mean, we are also members of Vani, and we've really been appreciating all the work being done. But simultaneously, many dialogues are going on in different civil societies. It can also work at cross purposes. So how do we bring everybody together? So I really like your idea to have these conversations in different cities, which needs to be organized, by organization like one.
I mean, one of the things perhaps, Harsh, is that first of all, yeah, thanks. The board member issue is one that I haven't touched upon either in the essay or in today's presentation. But Harsh, maybe one of the things to do is it possible to do a translation of this PowerPoint and send it out, post it on the website so that people can access it in other languages as well?
Yes, we'll do that. Hindi तो कर ही सकते हैं.
Okay. I'm sure there are volunteers here who
Yeah.
can do other languages as well.
Yeah. Datta Bhau.
Yes. I would say that this was a very good presentation, studied kind of around the situation and the realities of the sector. We have been talking many times on these issues, but I think we lack the action. And so this is very high time for all of us to do the action collectively. My experience is we are very good in taking the issues of people and fighting, coming on the road, but we are not ready to come together to fight for the sector's issues. Though it is reality, I suggest that we take a chance of the Vani as a platform, and we create a national level team, so that at least that team can lead to bringing these issues and these realities and policy issues in the, as you mentioned in your presentation also, in the manifesto of the major political parties at national level. Because the Lok Sabha is in our threshold. So we should do that. At least one action we should do. And people like Ingrid and all other people, they should be part of this committee. Or I don't say it's committee, we can have a team. This is the only thing I just want to say. Thank you.
Thanks. We're past 12:30 now.
Yeah.
Do you want to are there any other burning questions or comments, or should we
Close.
continue?
No, if there is no
I would
question.
like to thank Ingrid.
Sorry, Miniji, please.
Haji, I would like to thank Ingrid for, I was doing my mental journey with her as she was going through the presentation. And there's nothing that she missed upon. So, you feel that all of us who are concerned about the sector or have been engaged with the sector are probably on the same wavelength. The question that you raised is about, what do we do and how do we go about, and I think at the national level, even if you have such conversations, Ingrid, I feel linking the macro to the micro, to raise these issues with small groups who are doing excellent work around you, How do you bring their work into this scenario?
Yeah,
and I think for that, Vani can have a little workshops, or, personally, we should take the responsibilities. I'm a retired person. I'm home all the time. but bringing them to a common platform about the reality, what's happening. A lot of them, as you are saying, capacity building by the government, but I think the sector also needs to do capacity building of what's happening inside the sector. And thank you for responding to my request.
Strongly recommend, first of all, that we all read the book. I mean, for me, it was an education. Even, I mean, the chapter on NAC, for example, is fantastic. The chapter on cabinet and how cabinet is supposed to function. Because we're being impacted by all these institutions, but we don't understand them. So one of the things we need to do is I don't know, maybe we can do a series of webinars on each chapter. We've just done one on the civil society chapter. Maybe we can do one on NAC, one on coalitions, one, so that we can. I don't know how you feel. I mean, I feel even in my family WhatsApp group, sometimes I feel ill-equipped to respond to the ridiculous kinds of claims that are being made. So is there like a FAQ, that we can create, that we can all respond when this is not, whether you're talking to a journalist or you're talking to everyone has the right-wing uncle, right? Your right-wing uncle, whoever.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think it's well begun, Harsh, Ingrid, and all who participated. I think let's keep the spirit up and have these informal debates at the national level. And some of us take the responsibility. Datta and I are here in Maharashtra, at least those that I saw on the screen. I think we should also bring it down to the grassroots level. I think with that, I'd like to close my comments.
No, thank you very much. And if Ingrid is okay, we can close. And just I wanted to say a few things, if it is okay. First thing is that, I will start from the last point made by Ingrid. That is about that in our, like in any other profession, we have all type of creatures, good, bad, ugly, जिसको हिंदी में कहते हैं भूत, प्रेत, पिशाच. And that excuse is taken to penalize everyone. And when you talk to government, they say, no, Wani ke members are बहुत अच्छे हैं, बाकी खराब हैं. That way, that is not the reason. Like we have to be very candid about that. If there are 4 doctors doing bad practice, that doesn't mean all doctors have to be penalized. I think that is another one point which is very important. Second is about the point which Ingrid just now said, that there are people within our family, we are not able to explain to them because we have not created a narrative which a common person can understand. Our language is so complicated. So I think that is from one side, me, Shabin, we are trying to do that. I think we need to work more on that. Abhi kya ho raha hai? We create that documents. Now they're only on the Vani website or through social media. But I think we sometimes try to convert who are already converted. We need to go to some other people outside the sphere. A third point, which is very important, is that the sector is now we are divided in silos, thematic silos, strategic silos, geographical silos. I think we have to come together. And there's a lot of information we have with each other. We need to work on that. And thanks to the technology which has come COVID-19 ke baad, I think we do, even if we don't have resources, we can do webinars and conversations around this issue and develop something about it. So that's what I wanted to say. And yes, of course, there is a self-certification on the website of Vani for members. I think one can do that. There is also Credibility Alliance, there is Guide Star. There's so many instruments all around us which we should use to underscore the narrative of the sector, saying that these are the visible signs which indicates the accountability, transparency of the sector. That is another point.
Harsh, I just want to push back on the first point that you made, right? Which is that there are bad eggs and good eggs and indifferent eggs in our sector, just like in every other sector. My counter argument to that, to anyone who presents that argument, is show me the data. How many were prosecuted? How many were charged? How many were convicted? Because they won't give us the data, but they will make these sweeping allegations.
Correct.
So anyone who raises this question, I think the first thing to push back is to say, show me the data. Yeah. How many people were charged?
And all these laws are created by giving excuse of that. And another point, thanks for reminding Ingrid, actually what I will say that we did that study about 1 million missions.
Correct.
Right? How difficult it was to get data. All of us tried very hard. 1000 ka aaya bas. That is nothing. if you see your figures, अगर लाखों में है तो एटलीस्ट 50,000 का तो आना चाहिए. I
Correct.
think we should also see that, and that is a living document we are calling it. I think we need to work further on that study, come out with the facts. And if someone else is not giving the data, we should give our data to the public domain. Otherwise, वो शिकारी कहानी लिखेगा and they will write accordingly. But thank you very much, everyone, and Ingrid, for sparing time and sharing your experience. Shabin, आपको कुछ कहना है?
बस थैंक यू कहना है. एंड इट वाज वंडरफुल लेक्चर. ऐसे लगा जैसे यूनिवर्सिटी में बैठे हैं और एचओडी का लेक्चर.
अशोका में चल रहा है.
जी. So thank you very much, and to all the participants. This December we have series of such webinars. So I'll keep on informing. Please do join. Next
एक ना
is
ये
on.
मेरे को एक सजेशन दो कि जैसे आजकल हम देखते हैं ये YouTube वगैरह पे एक उसको कहते हैं देख हम पॉडकास्ट टाइप ऑफ चीजें आ रही हैं. जैसे मतलब देखते पर्सन हु इज आस्किंग क्वेश्चन एंड ओपन एंडेड कन्वर्सेशन. तो हमारे साथ भी ऐसा करना चाहिए सेक्टर में. आई थिंक जैसे वी शुड टॉक टू समवन लाइक उसको अपने सोशल मीडिया पे भी डालें. जैसे सिंपल कन्वर्सेशन. जैसे उपाध्याय जी को मैं देख रहा हूँ, डॉक्टर के उपाध्याय, ही हैज लॉट ऑफ एक्सपीरियंस ऑन सीएसआर. एक ऐसे कन्वर्सेशन हो. तो वी नीड टू पुट मोर एंड मोर इंफॉर्मेशन इन पब्लिक डोमेन एक्चुअली. थैंक यू. सॉरी शबी, बीच में घुस गया.
जी जी. और ये रिकॉर्डिंग भी हम वेबसाइट पे डालेंगे एंड सोशल मीडिया पे शेयर करेंगे. So thank you very much once again, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Datta Bhau.
Thank you all. Happy day.
Thank you.